Hello, everybody. I just wanted to welcome you back. So this lecture, we're going to be talking about kind of evolution of populations and what drives this evolution exactly, like what are different things that will drive evolution happen in populations. So first thing, just to make clear, individuals don't evolve, okay? Individuals survive or they don't survive. Individuals will reproduce or they don't. Uh, but individuals do not evolve. Individuals are selected, meaning that that individual has an advantage of some type, that particular individual. So now they are selected because they have that advantage. And that advantage will be spread throughout the population, and the population will evolve. So individuals are selected, but populations are what evolves. So first thing, just to reemphasize, is that variation is that raw material for natural selection. Without variation, there wouldn't be differences, and therefore everyone would be the same. There wouldn't be that separation. Because there's variation, now we have that separation. Some individuals will be more fit than others, and those individuals will be selected for. So where does this variation come from? Most of the time, variation comes from mutation of some type, which is a random change to DNA. A lot of times it happens in mitosis or meiosis of the individual, and that mutation is now passed on. It could be also caused by environmental damage. Also, variation can come from sex as well. And so sex is actually mixing your genetic material together and creating an individual that is a mix of the two parents. And that mix could create variation of some type. So that mixing of alleles, recombination of alleles, recombined in a specific way to make that offspring. Sex also spreads variation, obviously. So if you are selected for a specific trait and you make babies with someone else, that trait will be passed on. So now we're going to look at specifically what drives evolution, the 5 agents of evolutionary change. So first going to look at mutation, talk a little bit more about mutation. Then we're going to talk about gene flow, what exactly gene flow is. And then we're going to talk about non-random mating, what that is, and what that creates. Talk about genetic drift and what that is. And then we'll talk about selection and what selection does. So first of all, mutation and variation. Like we said before, mutations create variation. These new mutations are constantly appearing. Sometimes mutation changes the DNA sequence, and because they change that DNA sequence, as we learned about, we looked at genetics and what DNA does. Again, just to remind you guys, the DNA are the instructions to make proteins, and so if you change the DNA, then that means you're going to change the amino acid sequence. Remember, the DNA is the code for the amino acid sequence. That amino sequence changes, then that could change the protein. It could. Sometimes it doesn't. But it could change the protein. If the protein changes, then sometimes the structure changes. And if the structure changes, that might change the function. If you change the function, then all of a sudden you have a new individual, a new trait that's created. That could be bad, it could be good. It all varies. But these changes in proteins may change the phenotype and therefore change the fitness. Gene flow. So gene flow is the movement of individuals and alleles in and out of populations. So what does that mean? That basically means that individuals, if you want to relate it to humans, which is a good way to relate it, is that individuals from different countries, different cultures will mate, and those genes will be mixed together in this gene pool, if you will. So literally people from Japan, from Africa, from Europe, from South America, all kind of mate to mix those different types of genes. And so that creates a lot more stability. It's caused by varies depending on the individual, but like for flowers, seed pollen distribution by wind or insect. Again, those traits can be passed on. A lot of mixing, migration of animals. Also, subpopulations may have different allele frequencies. And what I mean by allele frequency is an allele is a alternative version of a trait. So like blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes. And the allele frequency is how often that allele appears in the population. So blue eyes is, say, making this up, but say about 20%, make up 20% of the population. So the allele frequency for blue eyes would be 20%. Just so that, because that's going to come up again. So migration, once again, causes genetic mixing across regions, and it reduces the differences between populations, and because of that, makes the population more stable because you have such a mix of different traits occurring. Again, when we look at evolution today, human evolution today, there is a lot of gene flow going on because it's so easy to travel around the world to different cultures, to different races, and to, of course, to mate. And so there's a special time issue that came out a few years ago that discussed this idea of gene flow in human populations, and they created this computer-generated person who is a mix of all main races on Earth, and that's kind of what she would look like. And they're talking about how eventually this continues on the same pace that we're going at, that all individuals are going to be all individuals will be the same race. Therefore, this concept of race will not occur anymore because there is so much gene flow going on within the human population. But again, it's probably far off in the future, but it's moving in that direction. Next thing that drives evolution is non-random mating. So specifically sexual selection, which we'll discuss more later. But non-random mating basically means you choose who you mate with. It's not just random. It's not some random person who you mate with. You actually choosing to mate with for a reason, whatever that reason may be. With the birds, it's usually the bright colors, the big chest, and the peacock, again, is the bright tail feathers. With lion, it's how large they are. The mane is a big deal. With deer, it's the antlers. So, or maybe that's an elk, I'm not sure. So non-random mating just basically means there's a purpose to who you mate with. It's not random. And because of that, that obviously means that trait is going to be selected for, whether it be the big mane, the big feathers, the big antlers, whatever it may be. So that's another thing that kind of drives evolution. The next thing, genetic drift. So genetic drift is basically random events, chance events that happen that affect the population. And we break it down into two things that could usually happen to a population. The first one we call the founder effect. And what the founder effect basically is it's when you have a big group of individuals, diverse group of individuals in a certain area. And a few of those specific individuals will move to another isolated area, like an island. In this case, the redbird moved to the island. And because of that, that is the only type of bird, let's say that's a finch, that's the only type, red finch is the only type of finch on that island. Therefore, you're only going to have red finches here, unless a yellow bird decides to move over. So the founder effect basically means a small group splinters off and starts a new colony. And because of that, you're basically going to have all the same, at first, all the same and same type, and eventually there may be some variation there that eventually evolve. And then the bottleneck effect. The bottleneck effect is the second type. In this case, it's when some factor, usually it's a disaster, reduces the population to a very small number, then the population recovers and expands again. And what that does, and I'll show you later, is it basically you narrow the gene pool, the amount of genes in the population, to a very, very small amount. And then all of a sudden they recover and they grow and become more, they grow, the population grows, and then they basically all look the same. They are all the same genetically. We'll talk about later about cheetahs. All cheetahs are almost identical twins, practically. They only have like 1% difference in variation because they've gone through actually 2 different bottlenecks, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Founder effect, when a new population started, only by a few individuals. Some rare alleles may be high frequency, others. So an example of this would be if blondes are going extinct theoretically because they are recessive and because there's so much gene flow going on that there's less and less natural blondes. But if we created this island, this hypothetical island where only blonde people could populate, then there would be, the blondes could survive because there would only be blonde people on that island because at first it was only blondes that were there. And so that's the idea with the founder effect, is that you have this small group that splinters off, and that group basically becomes grows in its population, but because it was such a small group, they all kind of look similar. And it kind of skews that gene pool, the new population. So it's not as diverse as it normally would be. Colonization of the New World is a great example. So this is just an example of how we can trace how humans migrated throughout the world and where they originated. We probably talked about how Africa, all humans originate in Africa. Well, or humans originate in Africa. And a way we can look at this is to say, okay, we look at blood types and look at where they look at native populations and how common O-type and B-type bloods are. So if we look at O-type, you see that a majority of the O-types originated in South America. But if we look at B-type, we look at, there's no B-type, very little B-type in the Americas, but they are very common in Europe and Asia. And that kind of allows us to kind of trace the pathway of these individuals and how they evolved. Bottleneck effect. So bottleneck effect, to remind you, is when a large population is drastically reduced by a disaster. So in this case, let's say that these are all individuals with different traits. So if a disaster basically eliminates all individuals except for blue and yellow, the next population of that individual will be just blue and yellow. There will be no red. Red has been completely eradicated from the population. So that's what bottleneck effect is. It's caused by many different things: famine, natural disaster, loss of habitat from humans, and again, this loss of variation by a chance event. Some chance event, now you lose all this variation and everyone looks the same. So it's not very diverse. So as I talked about cheetahs, all cheetahs share a small number of alleles. They're all practically identical twins. It's because they've gone through like 2 bottlenecks in the past few thousand years. They went through one with the Ice Age, about 10,000 years, and they most recently did again with the loss of habitat and poaching. So they really are very similar to each other, very little diversity with the cheetahs. And this also kind of the idea of the bottleneck also is very debated a lot with conservation, with endangered species, because these endangered species are at such a low level. Even if they recover, they're all very similar to each other, and so it's really important to have that diversity because it will affect. If one thing affects one individual, then it affects all the individuals. So they're really susceptible to being extinct even after they're endangered. So let's get through this quickly. Got to get out of the class. Natural selection. we've talked about natural selection can be due to many different things, as you can see. And again, those environmental conditions determine the fitness of the individual. And so it's a combination of the environmental factors as well as the genetic factors that drive natural selection to occur. All right, and then once again, there you go. Here's the 5 agents of evolution. Thanks so much, guys. By the way, this says AP Bio. It was from an AP Bio PowerPoint I used, but I cut it down a lot to simplify it. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. Have a great night. Talk to you later.